actual certification went into pilot in May of last year, and it's become a full-blown certification for the PMI as of Q3 of last year. So it's all very, very new here. And again, we're very excited in having this opportunity to go ahead and present all this to you. First, let's go through the agenda for today. As mentioned, we will have 1 hour. Roughly, my presentation will be 45 minutes, leaving us 15 minutes to go through Q&A. So please put your questions together, and I will try my best to get through all the questions as possible. If indeed we are not able to go through all the questions, we ensure you that we will get you an answer, even if we're not able to do it during this webinar. So please feel free to pass on any and all questions. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, on to the agenda. First of all, we will talk about what PMI PBA is all about, what the actual qualification procedure is, and also looking at how the examination is set up. And then we will look at the 5 domains to be found within PMI PBA, those being the needed assessment, planning, analysis, traceability and monitoring, and lastly, solution and evaluation. As I mentioned, we will try to earmark the last 15 minutes of this webinar so that you may be able to go ahead and pose questions. First of all, on to me. My name is Mike Boyle. I live in Vienna, Austria, have been a practitioner of business analysis and project management for a number of years. I perform various trainings for Knowledgehut, including, of course, project management, business analysis, Agile, Lean, and Kanban, just to name a few. This is an opportunity for me to go ahead and present myself, including an activity that I'm going through right now. There's a MOOC that I'm teaching, and MOOC is a massive open online course on business analysis, and I'm in the process of putting a book together, which will be coming out in about a month's time. Now on to the presentation. What is the PMI PBA? There are 2 very interesting facts to be found on the slide that you're looking at right now, the 2 that I'd like to go ahead and focus on. First of all, looking at the necessity that was certainly found from the PMI side to address the constant problem that they were running across in projects, that being that we were never really able to get the requirements in order. And so for that reason, I would say that was the main reason for PMI being spurred on to go ahead and put the certification, realizing the importance of the business analyst within the actual project. That being number 1. The second one would concern the future to be found within the business analyst profession. If you look at the line number 3, a prediction made by the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics that they predict by the year 2022 that there will be an increase of 19% of the positions to be found within the realm of business analysis. And so looking at it from the requirements perspective and also from the general demand perspective, PMI thought this was an opportune time to introduce the certification. In comparison to some of the other certifications to be found within the Project Management International, the intention is to uniquely identify the importance of the business analyst, and with that the actual certification, professional and business analysis was created. So what does the PMI PBA certification actually concentrate on in comparison to perhaps some other certifications to be found within the realm of business analysis? Here, PMI is looking specifically of the task to be found of a business analyst within the realm of projects, which makes this certification very unique in comparison to, say, for example, requirements engineer or the like. So what do you need to do to actually go ahead and qualify for the PMI PBA certification? We will be looking at all of these aspects within this presentation, what the actual credential is about, what is required for the application, the payment that is expected, the auditing process to be found within PMI, the actual exam policies and procedures, if indeed there are some issues tied to your submission, what that process would look like, and what is required after you've actually received the PMI PBA certification. What is required from you as a practitioner to go ahead and keep your certification moving forward. For those that are familiar with PMI, some of these stipulations will look very familiar. Let's look at the actual path. So let's assume that you have everything required for the application. You have 90 days to complete the applications once you've started it. The actual review period should be completed within 5 days. Obviously, payment is required to actually go ahead and initiate the process. It does happen that PMI will arbitrarily decide that certain certification applications should be audited. You will be given 90 days to complete that process if indeed you are selected to be audited. Let's assume you've gotten past the actual application and you have been selected to partake in the PMI PBH Credential examination. Once that acceptance has come through, you have 1 year to actually go ahead and complete the examination. Congratulations, you've passed the exam. Now you have 3 years to go ahead and ensure that you have your professional development units to go ahead and keep the PMI PBA credential for the next cycle. And if indeed you are not able to go ahead and fulfill that, there is a suspension period. And of course, it's possible that the certification could lapse. So it's very important, once you've received your PMI PBA certification, to work on those PDUs to ensure that you keep your credential in good standing. Here are the requirements for the PMI PBA credential. More or less matching that of what is to be found within the PMP and other certifications found from PMI. If indeed you have a necessary degree that being a high school diploma or the equivalent, it is required for you to have 7,500 hours within a 5-year period working as a practitioner of business analysis. General project experience would be 2,000 hours working on project teams. Again, 5 years within an 8-year period. And then training within the actual business analysis profession would be 35 hours. And they are to be obtained from a reputable institution like Knowledgehut. If indeed you have a university degree, bachelor's or above, you only require 4,500 hours, which would be roughly 3 years, working as a practitioner of business analysis, again within that 8-year period. The same rules tied to the actual project experience would apply here. And you would need also the 35 contact hours. The application can be applied for online, and that is the easiest and the most expedient. You would need to, of course, go ahead and supply all the necessary information within that application. including your BA experience and your project experience. You would need to go ahead and note the 35 contact hours within that application. Include your fee. The examination is comprised of 200 multiple choice questions. Of those 200, 25 are considered to be pre-test questions based on business analysis experience. This is computer-based training and is considered to be the standard method within PMI, as well as other organizations, of course. We can safely say that computer-based testing is the standard by which most certification testing is taking place today. The allotted time for the computer-based testing is 4 hours. You can, of course, take a break during those 4 hours, but the clock keeps ticking during that time. You will not be given more than 4 hours to complete the examination. Within the actual examination, we talked about the domains to be found within the PMI PBA examination. They are roughly broken down into the following percentages per domain. Within needs assessment, roughly 18% of the questions to be found within the examination fall within this realm. From planning would be 22%. As you can see, analysis takes up the brunt of the actual questions with 35%. Traceability and monitoring requires 15%. And lastly, evaluation is roughly 10% of the questions to be found within the examination. Let's go ahead and look at the actual domain so we have a better feeling what the content of the examination will look like, and certainly how PMI looks at the realm of business analysis. Domain number 1 would be a needs assessment. What are we actually talking about here? We are looking at the beginning of an assignment or a project, trying to ascertain what is the problem statement or what is the need that we're actually trying to solve. We see this activity as clearly being part of the business analyst remit. And by and large, this is where we actually go ahead and start the assignment. Within the domain needs assessment, we see that there are 5 main sections to be found. We look at why we go ahead and perform the needs assessment. We attempt to go ahead and identify the problem or the opportunity. Why would we look at it from a problem or an opportunity? Very often in an organization we're trying to capitalize on a market situation which will require us to go ahead and move from the current state or the as-is to the future state or the to-be. But first we need to go ahead and identify what is the opportunity that we're striving for. Moving along, we clearly need to understand what the current state of the organization is. Why would we need to know this information? If we are performing a transformation, we need to understand where we're starting from. Of course, the actions that would be required to address that actual business need. And once we've established the need, the problem, or the opportunity, we understand what our starting point is, what are the actions required. this is ample information for us to actually go ahead and start assembling the business case. Domain number 2 is planning. Within this domain, we as a business analyst decide what is the approach that we will take in order for us to go ahead and complete the various activities within our particular assignment. First of all, it's very important to understand the necessity of business analysis planning, and certainly if we are not able to go ahead and plan properly, what are the repercussions we can actually expect? We move on to, in my mind, one of the most important tasks from the business analyst, and that would be stakeholder analysis. Why do they phrase this point as being conduct or refine the stakeholder analysis? If we are practitioners, we understand that very often we have activities that are not just completed once and we're finished. We can look at the entire process as being iterative, meaning that we perform the same activity numerous times. Why would we do that? Well, certainly the farther on we move on with the project, the more information we have. As we know from project management, we start with assumptions and of course have our constraints. And basically an assumption cannot stay an assumption throughout the lifetime of a project. Either we are able to go ahead and confirm that assumption, which means it becomes a fact, or we negate that assumption, which means we need to go ahead and look at the rest of that of what we're doing and ascertain what kind of effect that actually has. After performing the stakeholder analysis, we start creating our business analysis plan. And within the realm of decomposition, once we've gone ahead and put together our plan, we start defining the work packages. Domain number 3 is analysis, which, if you remember from the slide previous, is where we find the majority of the questions within the examination. And as you can see, there are a number of topics to be found within this domain. Here we look at what elicitation is all about. Elicitation, as a definition by nature, is termed to be bringing forward. So we elicit the requirements from the various stakeholders to better understand what is required for the solution that we're trying to put together. So certainly from a PMI perspective, they felt it was very important, understandably so, to raise the issue of performing effective elicitation. So let's assume that we understand what elicitation is all about and clearly follow the importance. Then we start planning and preparing for this elicitation. We understand that we cannot just go ahead and start asking questions to the stakeholders. We have to have a strategy in how we approach the different stakeholders. Looking at this from a practical perspective, we know that we have different types of stakeholders in every project. Some will be senior, some will be junior. If we're familiar, if you have experience within project management, you will know about the power interest grid, which is also an element of the PMI PBA, where we need to understand what is the power of the various stakeholders and what kind of influence will they have on our assignment. Based on these facts and others, their location, the type of work they're completing, whether they are directly involved with your endeavor or indirectly affected by your endeavor, These are all elements that will come into play in our planning and certainly in the way that we go ahead and complete the elicitation. So we've gone ahead and planned and prepared for the elicitation. We continue on to actually going ahead and completing the work. We conduct the elicitation activities. Within this domain, we look at the various ways that elicitation can be completed, going from typical interviews, focus groups, requirements workshops, observation and the like. And once we've gone ahead and completed the elicitation, which is also an iterative activity, we just don't go ahead and complete the elicitation and consider it finished. Very often we need to go back over and over again based upon information that we've received. We need to go ahead and perform the documentation. What does that entail? Documentation here infers, based upon the various means of elicitation, we need to group all this data together so that we can actually go ahead and perform an analysis. Very often, different means of elicitation, the actual process has different forms, and the initial documentation will also have different forms. We need to collate this data and uniform it so that we can actually go ahead and perform proper analysis. We also look at the issues and challenges tied to elicitation, and if you are a practicing business analyst, I don't need to go into detail as to what kind of issues we run across. Again, it's important for PMI to go ahead and raise that issue. So we've gone ahead and completed the elicitation, we've documented the elicitation. This allows us to go ahead and move forward to actually analyze the requirements. And we model and refine those respective requirements based upon what we're able to find out, based on our assignment, based upon the most efficient way for us to move forward within our activities. Once we perform the modeling and refining of the requirements, then we move on to the actual documentation of the solution requirements. We started with needs, we moved on to requirements. Now we start looking at the solutions, because the solution will be the element, will be the impetus for the actual project. If you're a practitioner of business analysis, you will know that very often we will have a number of solutions that could be deployed to solve a need or a problem or an opportunity. And so we need to start going ahead and performing the documentation, which will enable us to go ahead and properly define that solution scope. We can't move on to the solutions before actually ensuring that we have validated and verified the requirements. What does this mean? I use a very simple formula to explain these two concepts, because I believe the simpler the formula, the easier it is to actually go ahead and remember that. If we look at the word validation, basically as a business analyst, we need to confirm that we understood the communication properly from the various stakeholders during the elicitation. So validate means, did we hear you correctly? Validation is, verification is, did we hear you correctly? Validation is another story. That is to ensure that we've properly identified the need. And then lastly, we move on to the approval sessions. Domain number 4, traceability and monitoring. If you are a business analyst practitioner, you understand the importance of traceability. What does traceability actually mean? Traceability ensures that we are able to keep on track from that problem statement, from that needs assessment, or from that opportunity declaration on to the actual requirements, making sure we don't have scope creep within our requirements, based on the development that takes place, understanding the solution, ensuring that the solution is in alignment with the requirements, which is also in alignment with our original impetus for this project, and certainly the end results. And we need to be able to trace from top to bottom and bottom to top. And monitoring is, of course, a basic component of quality assurance or quality control. Within this domain, traceability and monitoring, we have 7 sections that I'd like to go ahead and talk to you about. The overall concept of traceability, as I mentioned, the relationship and dependencies between various elements within your assignment, and the importance of how that actually plays into the overall traceability, and of course the success of your project. The process by which we go ahead and have requirements approved, the actual baselining of approved requirements. What are we talking about with baselining? Baselining is basically a way for us to, what I call is drawing a line in the sand, so that we have a demarcation. What did we say we would accomplish up to this certain period of point? What did we actually accomplish? Are we ahead? Are we behind? What kind of adjustments do we need to make? From that perspective, baselining is a very important activity. We perform baselining also with requirements, as you can see. We monitor the requirements using what's called a traceability matrix. And within PMI PBA, there's a very detailed description of what a traceability matrix is about and how that can be constructed. I mentioned earlier that requirements gathering is not an activity that you place and you're finished. The requirements actually have a life cycle, and it's important to understand the components of that life cycle. And of course, if you are a business analyst practitioner, you know that when you are in the middle of an assignment, it is seldom, if ever, that you are able to move from the beginning to the end without some sort of change request. So here within PMI PBA, we look and see what is the process by which we go ahead and manage those changes. Our last domain within the PMI PBA domain is solution evaluation. Let's recap. We started with a needs assessment, a problem statement, or an opportunity that's been identified. We start with the requirements, making sure that we understand all the stakeholders, that we properly uncovered all the requirements that are necessary for us to actually go ahead and come up with proper solutions. Now we start looking at the actual solution assessment, which will eventually come up with the basis by which we start our project. Solution evaluation has 10 points that I'd like to go ahead and talk to you about. First of all, the actual reason why we require solution evaluation. What is the purpose? As I mentioned earlier, very often you have more than one solution, so you need to be able to put them into certain criteria. If you remember, within the first domain, we talked about a business case. The business case is the basis by which we have a rationale to move forward. Within a business case, there are clear criteria that you need to take into consideration. And if we're talking about an organization, inevitably it's going to come down to the bottom line. So here it's important to understand that the solutions that we identify and the solution that is chosen clearly falls in alignment with the business case and what the organization is trying to achieve. We look at the actual mindset for the evaluation, which takes on various factors, very much tied to what we find within the PMBOK, enterprise environmental factors, and also looking at it from a perspective of organizational readiness. We all know that it makes no sense to go ahead and propose a solution which is not deployable within the organization. So we need to have a proper mindset for us to move forward. We cannot start the evaluation without planning how we will go at these activities. We need to understand what is the process to be followed. How best do we go ahead and achieve the most optimal results? That can only be accomplished by proper planning. We need to identify what exactly are we evaluating. How do we go ahead and perform the solution validation? And also ensure that we define the acceptance criteria. And if indeed we find defects along the ways, how do we go ahead and rectify them? Through that acceptance criteria, we come up with a go, no-go decision. Very often within the solution selection, one of the options is actually staying with the status quo. So we've gone ahead and received a go for the actual decision. We need to make sure that it's properly signed off. But it's not enough for a decision to be made on the solution. We need to make sure that the solution is actually being achieved. So we look at the long-term performance of the solution. And if indeed we need to go ahead and replace the solution, what does that actually look like? So these are the 5 domains to be found within the PMI PBA certification. And I was a little bit quicker than I expected. So that means for those that have some questions, I'd have plenty of time to go through them with you. Before I do that, though, I'd like to go ahead and mention, obviously it's quite clear, with us presenting to you the PMI PBA certification, Knowledgehut is one of the forerunners with regards to various types of learning, be it classroom learning, e-learning, virtual instruction, or in-house learning. Knowledgehut is able to go ahead and cover any of those needs. And so if you find an interest in that of what you've seen today, please don't hesitate to go ahead and reach out to Knowledgehut, because they will indeed have the solution that you'd be looking for. Okay, I open the stage for any and all questions you might have. Sorry, I'm just working with the box here. Okay, one of the questions we received since 2008, I am working as a BA, as in the insurance domain, within an organization. If you quit the organization now and start a company or freelancing for BA, can you? Yeah, I think that you do not need to stay with the same employer. The key is that you have enough project experience to go ahead and complete the examination. So let's go through a scenario. 2008, you're working for an insurance, within the insurance sector as a business analyst, and you move on to become a freelancer. That may or may not be still within that same sector, which is fine. One of the key elements that I'd like to highlight here, especially with regards to frameworks such as the PMI PBA, it is not sector specific. For those of you that actually have the PMP, you will know that the PMBOK is based upon the common body of knowledge, which now allows us, regardless of the sector, to follow best practices. PMI PBA follows the same direction. So rest assured you will have no issues as long as you're able to go ahead and cover the years. The only complication I could think of is making sure that you can go ahead and properly document that of what you have from your employer. And if indeed there is an audit, there would be a contact person that PMI would then contact to go ahead and validate the project experience that you actually put on your application. Let's move on to the next question. Can a planning engineer perform this exercise or do this, become a PMI PBA? If been involved in analysis, does this qualify? I think the key here is not the actual title, being a business analysis or not. The term business analysis has various meanings depending upon where you are, in which sector you're to be found, and in comparison to what we would see within project management. There's a clear designated project manager, and of course there can be some differentiations, but for the most part people understand what a project manager is doing. If you look at all the tasks that are actually being performed by a BA, you will see that the titles that a BA has can be varied, and so therefore I would not concern myself too much with the title of being a planning engineer. I think the real question you need to ask yourself, of that of what I've described so far, do you believe that you are performing those types of activities? If indeed you do believe that you've been performing those tasks, then I think you should definitely go for the examination. Sorry, I'm still trying to manage how the actual question box is. Okay, once you pass the examination, how do you gain the contact hours? I believe when you're referring to contact hours, you're referring to the professional development units that are required, just like we have within PMI. It would follow the same path. The categorization is the same, and please don't quote me on this. I believe there's something like 5 or 6 different categories, and they would be the same for PMI PBA as they are for the PMP. In other words, if you were attending a webinar, that would count towards PDUs. If you were to volunteer, that would also count as PDUs. Attend actual seminars, be involved in PMI meetings would also qualify. So all the elements that are to be found within the confines of the PMP tied to PDUs would more or less apply here. Is there any kind of tool which is used to manage the project includes full analysis of the project? Maybe the case of BA changes in mid. Okay, that's a very good question. I don't know if you would have one tool. Let's look at all these components. We have the activities to be found within the business analysis. And let's go through the domains again, the problem statement and the business case. Those should be properly documented by a business analyst. That's a key task to be found within business analysis, proper documentation. So if indeed there is a change of business analysts in the middle of a project, all the previous work should be documented. Let's move on to requirements. There are various tools for requirements management, especially when we look at the topic of traceability. That one's key. Very often these tools will be tied to the actual domain or the sector in which you're working. Needless to say, the technology fields are much more pronounced with regards to applications that can be found for going ahead and managing requirements. There's a slew of different tools on the market. And so it would be dependent upon what the actual organization is selected as a tool. Then we have, of course, the actual project per se. And so that would be of course, management. And that documentation would be found within the project management, within the project management plan, within the various components that are to be made of the put together of the project management plan, and of course requirements are part of that. The actual solution statement is also. So to properly answer the question, I guess it would be twofold. One, BA needs to document. The project manager needs to make sure that there's a repository for all that information. The second part, of course, directly addressing your question tied to the tool, that will be very depending upon the sector. And I hope with that I answer your question. Next question. If I'm a business analyst with 2.5 years experience in IT departments, is it mandatory to complete 3 years of experience in order to qualify for the exam? You actually need to have, depending upon your educational experience, as we mentioned, I believe it's 4,500 if you have a university degree, 7,500 if you have a secondary education. So you would need, well, okay, then that would be the 3 years, assuming you have a university degree. It could be varied. The same rules apply as I described in the first question, tied to the individual who was keen on leaving the current post within the insurance sector and concerned about perhaps going through the process again. Same rules apply here. So no worries. Again, I think the real question you need to ask yourself, do you find yourself doing these tasks? And that is, I cannot stress this question enough. Why? One, because we all know that we have different titles. And it's not always so clear if we're a business analyst or not. Because for the most part, we never do have that title of business analyst. Secondly, business analysis is a varied field, where if we were to look at the different sectors where business analysis is actually being professed, you will see the actual content being extremely varied. But it's interesting, in preparation for the Massive Open Online course I was referring to earlier, I went ahead and performed some analysis that was truly insightful. I went ahead and looked at this profession, business analysis, how it was described in different regions of the world, and the results were very interesting because the types of titles that people would have, the actual description of the position and the like were so varied, but you see that there's a clear need for these duties to be performed, and I think that you need to really focus on those various domains, those 5 domains that I listed, number one. Number two, when you fill out the application, one thing's for sure, if you start listing tasks that do not apply to that of what I just described, PMI will go back to you and say, great that you have this experience, but this has nothing to do with business analysis. So my suggestion to you is to take all of the documentation to be found from PMI, focusing primarily on the practice guide, which just came out in December, which is the basis of the examination, and certainly that of what I presented today, and make sure that the tasks that you list under your project experience are directly in alignment with these elements. Kind of struggling with the question, so please bear with me. Oh, okay, yes. One of the questions, can we get the contact details of the qualified persons like you after the course completion while preparing for the exam in case of some Helper discussion. Certainly. I will, after this slide, I have my contact details, and please feel to reach out to me. In conjunction with my contact details, is important to stress that I, apart from giving the presentation today, I am a trainer for Knowledgehut in this domain. So certainly, not only looking from my perspective, but Knowledgehut is more than competent in actually going ahead and helping you with that actual process. But I'd be more than happy to pass on my contact details, of course. Moving on. Oh, this question I already answered. Is there any type of tool? Does a continuing education for PMP also count for the PMI PBA? I would say yes and no. There are certain elements, I think that the same rules that would apply for any of the other certifications found within PMI would apply here. So in other words, if you were attending a webinar that was based on business analysis, is clear, that would fall within BA. It might not always be so clear if it would fall within the PMP. That being said, I think for the most part, if you can find that the activities that you're completing to get your PDUs fall within the general realm of that of what I discussed, then you should have no issues. That being said, I feel that it would be important, as I'm not PMI, that after you've come up with your certification, that you perhaps look for some specific guidance from PMI. That being said, with my experience with PMI, they've been rather flexible with regards to assigning PDUs for that of what I've been able to complete. This is a case of just using me as an example. I'm a PMP. I'm also a CBAP certified business analyst professional, and I've never had an issue with PMI with regards to PDUs. So I suspect you shouldn't have the issue. But again, for clarification's sake, I would refer you actually to PMI. Okay, let's see if I was able to get through all the questions. I think I have another one here. The question for the requirements to take the PMI BA test, does PMI reduce requirements for those that, no, they don't. No, the requirements are the same. In other words, let's do a comparison, because I think an example is always a good way to understand the point. Let's assume, use me as an example. I have a PMP. Going for the PMI PBA, I would still need to have the 35 hours of education that are required, and this would be tied to business analysis, which is obviously much different than studying for the PMBOK. That would be number one. Number two, the hours that I would have would be, the project hours I would have would be directly tied to the task to be found within the 5 domains that I listed. So then those activities would be different. Of course, the rules tied to secondary education and university education are the same that we find within the PMBOK. That's the only point of commonality I find. Hope you answer your question with that. So I'm just going through the questions to make sure I got all the questions answered. Practice makes perfect. I'm doing better with this question tab. And I could recognize whether I answered the question or not. Okay, another question that I haven't answered so far, that would be what level of details of documentation have to be provided as part of the application to take the exam for the evaluation to take place on whether or not the exam can be taken. So in other words, to paraphrase that, whether you qualify or not. What if the required documentation cannot be provided due to confidential? Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think that applies to all certification. My personal take that I believe that you can describe general what you are doing. You don't have to name any names of clients. You don't need to go into details about a problem statement and the like. But I do think it's possible if we look through 5 domains and just let's go through on a high-level basis right now. I think you can describe these general enough that no confidentiality will be broken. You would define the problem statement or perform a needs assessment, identify an opportunity, put together a business case. I think it would be enough for you to go ahead and say that you went ahead and performed those activities and the hours that were required to go ahead and complete those tasks. And for a supervisor to go ahead and say, yes, you wrote together a business case, does not infringe on any confidentiality. Let's move on. Going on to the actual planning. Again, I think you can keep that very generic. That shouldn't be an issue, certainly with regards to the analysis. Traceability monitoring falls in the same category in solutions. I don't see an issue with that personally. If you have any issues, I'd be more than happy, or I'm sure best probably would be to go through Knowledgehut, because I believe that they have a lot of information already stored to make this process as easy as possible for you. Okay, I believe I have all the questions. I'll take one last round. Oh, okay, got another question. What is the typical format of a traceability matrix? Is it an Excel format, and what does it constitute? Here I would say it really depends on the complexity of your undertaking. If you are talking about a large assignment, I wouldn't leave it in Excel. Then I would really look to go ahead and come up with an application that would allow you to go ahead and perform your traceability matrix. I'm going to give you an example, something that I'm very, very familiar with, directly tied to Agile. If we were to look at a tool like Jira, and I believe, don't get me wrong, I'm not purporting any tool, but I've noticed that Jira is very popular. Within a tool like Jira, they will actually go ahead and allow for the traceability matrix to take place. So you will come up with your user stories, you will go ahead and come up with your functional specs, your technical specs, you will go ahead and define the features, define your work packages, you would have a finished product, you would have your acceptance criteria. You want to be able to trace all of that. You want to go ahead and define all the dependencies between all of these requirements, and know full well that A needs to be completed before B. What happens if B is removed? Does that have an effect on A? The more complex the project is, the more the necessity of you actually having an application to perform this activity. My opinion. For something simple, you can go ahead and do that in Excel. But certainly, if everything's manual, and if things are moving around in your assignment, that can be very, very tricky, time-consuming, and a source of error. So there I would definitely watch out. Still looking to see if I have all the questions answered. Okay, I have a bachelor's degree in 2.75 years experience. Is it mandatory to have the 3 years to start with PDUs? No, actually you would need to have 3 years experience within business analysis to apply for the PMI PBA credential. So the PDUs, the professional development units, are components that you collect after you have your certification, and you need 60 PDUs within that 3-year cycle in order to hold on to your certification. So again, you need to have the 3 years before you can actually go ahead and apply for the certification. Okay, I think I was able to identify all of the questions. So if there are no other questions, oh, we did well. We were able to go ahead and accomplish everything within the hour's time. The last thing, oh, of course, thank you very much for joining. Again, we're very appreciative of you taking out an hour from your busy day to spend it with us. As promised, here are my contact details. And I say thank you very much for joining.